content. My name is Randall Wilson, and this is the third Trade Adjustment Assistance Community College Career and Training Grant webinar. We are going to speak about student data today, but first I'd like to turn things over to my colleague, Dudney Silla from Jobs to the Future, and he'll give you some logistical pointers for the webinar.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dudney Silla. Thank you for joining us for the webinar today. We'd like to ask everyone to please mute your phones upon entry, as this will help us to limit the noise in the background. If this webinar is being recorded, and we will make it available via SharePoint after today's session. In the meantime, if you do require any other WebEx technical support, you can call the number on your screen at 1-866-229-3239. On the bottom right, you can find your chat box, so if you have any additional questions throughout the webinar, please send your questions along to me privately using the chat box. We will also have a question and answer session at the end of the webinar, so throughout the webinar, please include your questions there, and we'll be able to read off of that to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dudney. We're focusing today on data, both getting it and using it for evaluation and other purposes. Now, we're going to look at an example from a TAACCCT grant and its evaluation, but I want us to think in broader terms, so I'm going to speak a little bit first to some of the general issues about evaluation, and then we're going to turn it over to our guests. Aaron Devine, coordinator for the Arkansas TAACCCT grant. Aaron Devine's at Arkansas Northwest Community College, and Christopher Spence, who's principal of New Growth Group in Cleveland, Ohio. He's the evaluator for the TAACCCT grant, also called PACE, in Arkansas. Next, please. So, data is essential, as we all know, to evaluation. It's as essential as breathing is, as oxygen is to breathing. But choosing what data to use and getting it and using it effectively is a lot more complicated. We're going to also talk about data because you can use it in a number of ways beyond program evaluation and reporting. Obviously, it's required for project monitoring, but you can also use it to maximize support and case management for participants. And ideally, beyond evaluation, you can collect data on students and on other aspects of your program for feedback, for continuous quality improvement, looking at things like loss points. Where are students falling out? Where are they accelerating? So finally, we think that the topic of data offers grantees and their evaluators an opportunity for dialogue. Evaluators can offer questions and ideas that build grantees' capacity for data management and data use. And colleges, by the same token, can assist evaluators in collecting and transmitting data. And that partnership is very central to what we want to see, what we want you to pick up from this case study today, that getting the relationship right and the communication right between the evaluator and the grantee college or consortium is essential. Next slide, please. So what considerations do we need to bear in mind in general for using participant data for evaluation? Well, obviously, availability. Can we get the data? Is it accessible? In what form? Who owns it? Is it held at the state or the college level? And what format is it in? And essentially, can we get it in a timely way to produce an evaluation? Data quality. We have to think about its reliability or accuracy. Is it complete, or are there serious gaps that we have to consider? Is it usable? Can we protect students' confidentiality? And you'll hear more from Chris and Aaron about the issue of FERPA, of Family Education Rights and Protection Act, privacy concerns. And finally, is the data relevant? Does it measure what we need? Is it sufficient from the standpoint of providing an adequate treatment and comparison group for supporting the methodology? Next, please. Some of the sources and types of participant data to consider, as well as their location. At the college level, there's administrative databases such as Banner, and we heard some of the strengths and weaknesses of sources like this in the presentation 2 weeks ago for those of you who were tuned into our comparison group, that this data may be easily available, but it may not extend to all the demographic markers or covariates you need for your evaluation. It may not be integrated across different phases of a student's career, particularly if there's a developmental or remedial education component. Some states, as you know, have data warehouses that provide longitudinal data from P through 20. But this is data that you can look at for enrollment, status at enrollment, and over time at academic progress and outcomes. It may require self-reporting by students and use of an intake form. Many of our evaluations are also relying on external agencies, such as the Department of Labor or Employment for wage and employment information, or social agencies that provide public benefits like TANF for family income data. And finally, primary sources, surveying students, faculty members, or focus groups of participants to determine the qualitative information about the grant. Okay, next please. So what I hope you'll keep in mind as we listen to the presentation from the PACE and its evaluator, Chris Spence, think about your own challenges in getting and using data for evaluation, in making it usable. What would most help you to address them? How can our speakers and your peers in TAACCCT, evaluators and grantees, help you? How can you engage your partners, whether they're the evaluation team or your grantees or outside agencies, to facilitate data gathering? And beyond evaluation, how else are you using or planning to use participant data? With that said, I'd like to turn things over now to Aaron Devine and Chris Spence.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Aaron Devine. I'm the Executive Director of the PACE grant here in Arkansas. And before I hand it over to Chris, I'm going to go over a brief overview of our grant here. And then Chris will handle most of the data issues. So next slide, please. Our agenda today, as I said, we'll cover a PACE overview. We will cover an evaluation overview, the data plan, and then most importantly, the lessons learned. PACE is an acronym that stands for Path to Accelerated Completion in Employment. It's comprised of a consortium of all 22 two-year colleges in the state of Arkansas, with Northwest Arkansas Community College maintaining the role of the lead college within the consortium. PACE is essentially divided into 3 strategies. Strategy 1 is designed to transform developmental education to accelerate student advancement. Strategy 2 is designed to streamline certification and degree pathways to reduce time to completion and credit to completion. And Strategy 3 is designed to enhance student support technology systems, transform student advisement systems as a means for reducing time to completion and unnecessary credit accumulation, and improving academic performance and job placement. Now, each strategy is broken down into some sub-strategies, and I'll try to briefly describe those. Under Strategy 1, we have Sub-Strategy 1.1. That's designed to address the needs of the assessment and placement processes. The idea was to redesign each of those processes at all 22 of the two-year colleges to accelerate its student advancement. Within that sub-strategy, Sub-Strategy A was designed to engage in test practice prior to sitting for placement exams. Strategy B, under the same strategy, was to receive enhanced assessment of credit value for prior work and life experience. Strategy 1.2 was designed to eliminate developmental course education math courses for career and technical programs, and the third sub-strategy under Strategy 1 was the redesign of all English and reading courses within those targeted pathways. Now, Strategy 2 of the PACE grant here in Arkansas is really the meat and potatoes, so to speak, of the grant. This strategy pinpointed the need to streamline certification and degree pathways, restructure certificate degree programs to reduce time to completion and credit to completion. Within that strategy, the two sub-strategies, strategy 2.1 was to actively engage employers in extensive occupational program revision to reduce unnecessary content and accelerate time to completion. And strategy 2.2 is to eliminate developmental education courses for career and technical programs. Strategy 3 of the PACE grant was designed to enhance student support technology and systems, transform student advisement systems as a means for reducing time to completion and unnecessary credit accumulation, and for improving academic performance and job placement. The sub-strategies of Strategy 3, Strategy 3.1 was to implement technologies that will provide active guidance, monitor student progress, and inform students of milestones and decision points, and require that all students in those targeted programs from Strategy 2 were required to commit to a program map and completion plan during their very first semester. And Strategy 3.2 was implemented to partner with local workforce investment boards to create virtual career centers at every institution. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to Chris Spence with New Growth Evaluators, and he'll handle the evaluation overview. Chris?
Great. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Aaron. I'm Chris Spence from New Growth Group. We're an evaluation group based in Cleveland, Ohio, working with Aaron and the Arkansas PACE grant, as well as two Round 2 TAACCCT grants. The Arkansas PACE grant, as you can tell from Aaron's description, is comprised of a single state. It's all of the colleges, all the two-year colleges in the state of Arkansas. In many ways, that offers some great advantages relative to having a centralized project operating within one state. From an evaluation perspective, offers some advantages relative to the evaluations that I'm sure some of you are taking on, multi-state consortium evaluations. We're doing a Round 2 TAACCCT evaluation that's 10 colleges. It's 13 colleges in 10 states. And so we're presenting today the PACE evaluation, which is a single state model. I certainly sympathize with those of you that are planning and executing multi-state evaluations. I'm going to spend about 20 minutes giving a high-level overview of the PACE evaluation with a little bit of a specific focus on our approach for collecting data. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the lessons that we've learned along the way. For the experienced TAACCCT evaluators listening, I'm very interested in how you've approached the topics that I'll raise today. Please feel free to ask questions or provide comments along the way. For those of you that are new to TAACCCT evaluations, I hope there are a few helpful items to keep in mind as you plan your work. Okay, next slide. I'm going to move pretty quickly through the description of the evaluation and try to get quickly into the data plan aspects of the project. This is a very high-level outline of the process that we've gone through with the PACE colleges and that we go through with each of our clients in developing evaluation plans. We start with a logic model, research to help us, wrap our minds around all the moving pieces and to understand the mechanics of how the outcomes are being derived from the various strategies in the project. Research questions are derived from there. And then once we have the research questions, we develop data plans. We put a pretty heavy emphasis on holding training sessions and trying to be as communicative as possible with the staff at each of the colleges in the consortium so they understand what the evaluation is all about and what the data requests are. And so they also can get a sense of how much time it'll take, and they can plan accordingly for collecting the data that we're asking for. We develop a database on our end, work to put in place the channels for obtaining data, namely the data user agreements, conduct data testing, and then ongoing evaluation activities and analyses. Next question. Next slide, please. Thanks. So just some of the basic specs of the evaluation. I'm not going to get too deep into how we're measuring impacts for each of the strategies that Aaron presented. As you can tell, it's a sprawling initiative. Some of the key evaluation questions that we're addressing are built around the key outcomes that are listed in the middle of this slide. Things like program enrollments, retentions, progress, completion of awards. There's a significant developmental education strategy in this grant, so we're wanting to assess whether or not students are completing developmental education differently now relative to a historic time period. There's an assessment test strategy, and then, of course, we're looking at employment, job retention, and earnings. The evaluation, which encompasses all 22 two-year colleges in the state of Arkansas, also brings in data from 2 state agencies. There are 146 targeted programs of study under the grant, which we have grouped into 43 program types for the purposes of comparison. All of the colleges are offering 3 tiers of award. There is a short-term certificate, which is about 1 semester, called a Certificate of Proficiency. There's an intermediate term certificate called a Technical Certificate, which is about a year in duration, and then associate degrees. The programs are primarily in the healthcare and manufacturing fields and include programs like SPNA, EMT, nursing, various kinds of mechanics, and on the manufacturing side, and other manufacturing technology certificates and degrees. We have a comparative strategy for we have strategies for doing comparative analyses for each of the program strategies that Aaron outlined earlier. The primary analysis that we're using to do, one of the primary analyses that we're using is doing a comparisons of averages and proportions, things like looking at completion rates for program participants relative to their comparison groups. We're layering in subgroup analyses and doing regressions to look at the effects of some covariates. We're using a very basic matching strategy that essentially looks at matches on the number of credits that an individual brings with them at the time they declare a program of study. And we are not doing any, we're not using propensity scores in any way. I understand that is an area, that's a tool that many people are employing in their evaluation approaches. We're not using propensity scores in this evaluation. Next slide, please. Thanks. I wanted to be able to communicate a few key thoughts or themes for people who are new to TAACCCT evaluation, and so thought that I'd just put them on a slide up front. These are going to come up throughout the remainder of the slides. We have found varying capacities at colleges to comply with our data requests. Some of the challenge has to do with the time and attention that college staff are devoting to the evaluation. Some aspects of the challenge have to do with the technical abilities to do queries in college databases. We have found that we need to be as communicative as possible and try to get to the people that are going to be collecting the data for us to communicate the level of depth and the scope of the data collection that we're doing. I would encourage everyone as they launch into these projects to try to get a sense of the competencies within each of the colleges to access and provide the data that you're requesting. And then as you get a sense of that, to make sure that the people that will be collecting the data, for example, if it's an IR, institutional researcher, that they know how time intensive it will be to collect the data. The completeness and cleanliness of data submissions has varied widely, no matter how much we try to lock formats or be very prescriptive about what it is that we're expecting in our data submissions. We've had to build in extra time to go back and forth with colleges prior to sort of the final deadline for needing data. And so I would encourage building in extra time for that. In Arkansas, we've had a bottleneck in our data flow, and I'll get into this in a little bit and talk about specifically what that is. It hasn't thrown us irretrievably off of our timeline, and it's been beneficial in many ways. But timing has become an important consideration, and the bottleneck in data flow has, and again, I'll describe it in a moment, but it has become important for us to keep in mind as we're planning our analyses. And then getting the data flowing, especially with respect to setting up data user agreements, is very time consuming and requires active, very active project management. We have found, and in speaking with other evaluators, I know this is not uncommon, that issues of privacy and data sharing are not always clear or resolved at colleges, and so some active project management is necessary to set up the data channels. Okay, thank you. Next slide. Just a couple of quick slides on some administrative pieces. So we all need individual level data to do the analyses that we want to do. We originally in Arkansas asked for the release of personally identifiable information. Our federal project officer articulated to us that it was expected that they would do that. Our read of FERPA is that under the studies exception, that is allowed. And again, it was stated in a couple of places in the early materials of the PACE project that PII data would be shared. And so we started with that as our approach. We built our data planning around the expectation that we would have PII and that Social Security number specifically would be the linking variable that we would use to link up with sources like wage records. Not everybody shared our opinion, though, that PII is shareable, and it turned into a 6-month process in Arkansas that ultimately went to the state's Attorney General's office for an interpretation on what was shareable. And after all that, we were not receiving data with PII. Instead, we're receiving de-identified individual level data. Arkansas has a data warehouse, and it's called the Arkansas Research Center. And we are very fortunate that they have some skilled data managers there. This is the bottleneck that I'm talking about. We're kind of at the whim of the Arkansas Research Center to aggregate, bring together the data that we need, merge it using Social Security numbers with the other data sources that we're linking, and then assigning an evaluation number to each individual, and then providing that data to us for doing analyses. It has been working. We are getting the data that we need so we can do our comparison group analyses and impact evaluation. It's slow, though, because we are reliant on the staff at the Arkansas Research Center to do all that work and to process the data for us. Okay, next slide. So participant intake forms, it's another administrative piece. We are administering intake forms to all program participants at the beginning of the term. Instructors within certain identified courses are administering the intake forms, and they're then giving the forms after they've been filled out by the participants to the project director, who keys them in to our data template and then retains the paper copy on file. So there's been some work that's needed to go into making sure that the processes for and the instructions for what is said to students at the time when the intake form is administered to them, and to make sure that the instructors know what to do with the forms and who to give them to, et cetera. I would encourage folks that are new to the PACE evaluation to make sure to devote adequate time to ensuring that the procedures for administering those intake forms are clear. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so then I will spend a little bit of time talking about our data plan in Arkansas. And I have about 10 slides here. I'm going to move pretty quickly through these to make sure we have time for questions and comments and things. This is the process that we've used for developing our data plan. Once we know our evaluation questions, we make sure that we're very specific in terms of defining who our program participants and comparison cohort members are. One of the vagaries of tax grants is that they talk in terms of unique participants in the grant. There's a table that has been in the tax grants required in the proposals that the colleges submit to count unique participants, but it doesn't define what participants are and how you're able to identify them. And so there's some process work to make sure that everyone's on the same page in terms of being able to identify who participants are. Of course, you need to know what your data sources are and data elements are. So we, in Arkansas, started with the Department of Higher Education's data dictionary, knowing that all of the colleges in the state were going to be using a uniform, or to the extent possible, a uniform set of fields and definitions, because those are the fields that they use to report to the State Department of Higher Ed. And then as we identified fields that we needed that were not included in that Arkansas Department of Higher Ed data dictionary, then we layered them on as necessary. And then working through the processes for how data is going to be delivered, the schedules, and how it's going to be transmitted to us. That was fluid in Arkansas as we were working through whether or not we would be allowed to access data with TII. The processes for delivering the data were evolving along with those. That's all part of the process for developing the data plan. Next slide, please. Program participants are, in Arkansas, students who have declared for a targeted program of study, and we're using academic year 2009 as our historical comparison. In other words, students who have enrolled in a targeted program of study that's being affected by the PACE grant, those students, as they declare their targeted programs of study, are compared to students from those same programs of study from academic year 2009. We have very few new programs, and so historical comparison works well in Arkansas. The challenge that we have run into, or that we've had, is what to do with people that are in a program of study but haven't declared. At this point in time, those people are not considered participants in this grant, even though, or in this evaluation, even though they are potentially being impacted by the grant. One thing that we have been able to build into round 2 evaluations is a strategy for including students who are enrolled in major courses. In other words, the courses that are required for a program of study and have some amount of specificity and are aligned with just that program of study. So we're not talking about courses like algebra or English 101. Instead, we're talking about courses that are related to just that program of study, which has enabled us to widen the net that we're using to identify students who are in the evaluation. Okay, next slide, thank you. So in Arkansas, we're getting data from 4 sources primarily. College databases, we're asking for one-time student data, which is data on students that doesn't change, things like gender. We're also asking for ongoing student data, in other words, a report on what happens to those students each term, how many credits did they earn, what classes did they pass, et cetera. And then information on programs, how many credits, what's the developmental education requirement, so we can get a sense of how students are flowing through programs. We are also collecting data from the Department of Higher Education, this is the state's department, on transfers, and so we can get a sense of what happened to students after. Try to get a little bit more visibility on what may have happened to students after they left one of the 2-year colleges. We are also using National Student Clearinghouse data. The state has an employment agency that is able to provide quarterly wage records. So we know how much an individual, whether or not an individual is employed during a particular quarter, and then how much they earn during that quarter, as well as the name of their employer and the industry of their employer. And then, of course, there's data from intake forms. We have not built in any post-completion surveys in the PACE grant, although in a round 2 grant, we're using post-completion surveys to look at some more granular information about what happens to students as they move into employment, specifically what occupations they are working in, and trying to get a sense in working with employers on how applicable the skills they're learning are to and their job performance in the jobs that they're taking after they leave the college. Next slide, please. So in Arkansas, this is how our data is flowing. We have all of our data sources that are providing data to the Arkansas Research Center, which is aggregating the data, not aggregating it, but linking all of these databases together. We are working with them to do data checks. Because they're not able to share Social Security numbers with us, they're taking on a lot of the burden of assessing the completeness and the cleanliness of data. We're working with them to try to wrangle data and corral data that's missing or messy. After the data has been checked, that's when we're able to do our analysis. Okay, I'll move quickly through the next couple of slides. We have a handful of fields that we've asked colleges to tell us. This is the set of fields that we've asked them to tell us around programs of study. We wanted to know what they're called, the CIP code, what type of award is it, number of credits required, and the expected program length. Next slide. Within each program of study, this is not something that we have done in PACE, but we're doing in a round 2 evaluation. We've asked for courses, major courses, so we can identify students that haven't declared for a program of study, but that are included in our evaluation. One-time student data, this is data that doesn't change over time. Gender is an example. Ongoing student data, which is data that needs to be updated following each academic term. Student transfer data, which lets us know if a student has moved into another academic setting or post-secondary setting. And employment and earnings data. In Arkansas, we're getting this from their state workforce agency, and it's quarterly earnings records. Okay, so we established a timeline for data submissions. Basically, following each academic term, we've asked the colleges to provide data to us. We have experienced some slipping of the timeline, and not irretrievably so. I mean, we've been able to get the data that we need in order to meet our Department of Labor reporting requirements. I will say that if there are project managers listening to this call, the evaluations, the flow of data through the evaluation process is very slow, and so you should not expect to be able to use the evaluation outcomes to do real-time project management. If you're wanting to know information around how many people you have enrolled, how many participants you have, so you can get a sense of whether or not you're hitting your Department of Labor targets, waiting for the evaluation isn't going to help you do that. And so having something that collects the information you need in a more timely manner is necessary. Okay, a couple of lessons learned. Next. First is around communication. So don't underestimate the need to communicate with colleges about the evaluation. We have attempted in each of our TAACCCT evaluations to communicate as much as we can about what the design of the evaluation is, the timelines, the data specs, and we have found that there's still confusion out there. And so it's a variety of reasons for that. I mean, people engage in the evaluation at different times. There's also staff turnover. We have found it to be necessary to be extremely available to communicate with the colleges as much as possible in the form of conference calls, webinars, and also to provide written materials and websites for reference in order to just create as many resources as possible for the colleges to understand what's going on with the evaluation and what's needed. Accessing PII, policies for sharing PII vary from college to college. It's important to work with, to communicate early with the colleges about your need to access individual level records. The intent of the grant is to enable rigorous third-party evaluations. We continue to push and to encourage our colleges to share TII with us. The option that we have given some colleges in our round 2 consortium evaluation is to provide us with de-identified data, but they take the onus of bringing together all the various external databases, merging them, cleaning them, and de-identifying them, which is a lot of work for them. If they want to do that, we can work with that. We, of course, prefer to have control of the data ourselves, but in the absence of that, that's what we ask the colleges to do. One thing that we have done in order to encourage colleges to provide individual level records with PII to us is to ask our lead colleges to take a proactive role to try to push that issue. And then also we've had our federal project officer offer to try to lean on colleges to make that sort of data available for us. Data wrangling, in other words, doing the best to ensure the completeness and cleanliness of data is very time consuming. We have wanted to make sure that our IR people review all the data request templates when they're in draft form and really understand what each of the elements are and what all the data sources are, so they know the time involved to fulfill a data request. Even with that, we still have experienced missing fields, non-compliant formats, and slipping timelines. And so building in the staff capacity on the evaluation team to do data wrangling, to fill in your data sets is it's necessary. Make sure you have somebody that has the time to chase down and fill in all of that missing data. Okay, so I almost took us all the way up until 3 o'clock, so I'll stop there and turn it back over to Randy and Dudney.
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you, Aaron. So we want to have some discussion now, and we've received a number of questions in the chat box, some of which flow more naturally to Aaron as coordinator of the program, and some that are specifically addressed to the evaluation. Let's look at a couple of the privacy and ethics issues with student consent. Specific question is, do you have a specific disclosure form, and could you discuss the ethics of using student information for reporting purposes, given that they need not consent, or they're not required to get their consent to participate in the TAACCCT grant?
Well, I'll take that on at least briefly. With the PACE grant, we required all the students in the redesigned pathways under Strategy 2 to complete a PACE participant form that essentially grants us access to their wage data and allows the Department of Labor to sign off on that. So for the most part, the students who we're tracking are well aware of the requirements, and that their wage data and academic data may be used later for the needs of the Department of Labor.
A related question, why do you need Social Security numbers? If wouldn't the de-identified student records be all right if they're merged with wage data? Would they be sufficient if they're merged with the wage data and other sources before you obtain it?
So we don't receive Social Security numbers. Right. By the time we receive the data, the Social Security numbers have been stripped out. But Social Security number is needed in order to merge the data with the wage records. And so that information needs to be collected at some point and used by somebody to do that merge. In Arkansas, because there is a data warehouse, they're able to do that merge for us, then strip the Social Security numbers out and send us the de-identified records. if you don't have a resource like the Arkansas Research Center that can do that, then somebody has to do that work of using Social Security numbers to merge the databases.
And a related question, just to clarify, how do you obtain the wage and employment data? That's collected at the state level? Is it transmitted to you via the state?
It is. In Arkansas, it's collected at, in every state, it's collected at the state level. One of the things that's making my life more difficult in my round 2 evaluation, which is 13 colleges in 10 different states, is that we are trying to work with 10 different wage agencies to provide that data. It's still unknown if we're going to get it from all 10 states. There are some states more forthcoming with it than others. But yes, it's collected at the state level. In most cases, it's the workforce agency that has it.
Chris, are you assisting with performance reporting? And if not, who is handling it from the PACE standpoint?
We haven't really been assisting with that. Aaron has been taking that on.
Yeah, that's the majority of the director's role in it, at least in that regard, has been to sort of shoulder that responsibility. And a lot of that is based off of a reporting structure from the consortium members so that we can monitor their progress as we move forward and sort of use their monthly reports to evaluate and address where each consortium member is at that time and whether or not they may need to reevaluate where they are to meet our goals.
I will say that in working with other consortia, other TAACCCT evaluations, we are helping with that. And so there probably are a variety of roles out there for evaluators in terms of how they're helping with performance reporting or not.
Do you have to contract with the Arkansas Department of Higher Education for a fee to get the data? And if so, did that come from the project or the evaluator?
We have not had to contract with them. You know, I've worked on other evaluations where there are fees. Hopefully when the drafters of your tax proposal were thinking through their evaluation plan, they had some sense of whether or not fees would be required to access the data. If not, and there is a fee, maybe you can negotiate a waiver of the fee somehow. We've been fortunate in Arkansas that there is not a fee, although there is a little bit of budget set aside for the data managers at the Arkansas Research Center. It's not a, yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
No, I was just going to add that it was originally, that line in the budget was originally designed to supply the Arkansas Department of Higher Ed with funds to address that. As it turned out, the Arkansas Research Center ended up being a more viable option to provide us that technical assistance that was necessary. So while there weren't any fees, there certainly was some consideration for the necessary funds available for technical assistance at that level. I think it was, as the grant was written, that was one thing that was a primary concern for the grant writers.
Well, thank you. I just want to make a housekeeping announcement that because we had some audio problems at the outset of the webinar, we're going to stay online for another 10 minutes to continue questions as long as they're coming in. Just another quick announcement. We had several questions about the availability of the slides, and they should be up in a day or two. Mm-hmm. And you can find them at the SharePoint site for the grant. If you are not yet accessing SharePoint, you can send an email to tacceval@urban.org. That's TAACCCT eval, EVAL, urban.org, and you can get set up in SharePoint there. Another general question that came in is someone wanted a clarification about whether the program evaluation, in this case, in this round 1 grant, is the same as the outcome reporting requirements from the federal government. And in fact, they're different. In the subsequent rounds, there's a required program evaluation, and all rounds are required to report outcome data to the Department of Labor. But this program evaluation, which was optional, an external evaluation is optional in round 1. It is required in the later grants. But I think one of the underlying questions that's interesting here is how your evaluator can be give assistance with performance reporting, as Chris mentioned, in some cases, as well as how that performance data might be useful to you beyond government reporting purposes for assessing and giving you feedback on your program, independent of the evaluation. There's also a question for Aaron. Is PACE willing to share its consent form and intake form as templates for other programs to use?
Oh, absolutely. I think as we near the end of the round 1, we're required to submit a great deal of our curriculum to Creative Commons, which is an open educational resource database. And so in the spirit of that, feel free to contact me and we can provide the template for those forms without an issue.
Okay.
Randy, can the question that you're making about the difference between performance reporting and the evaluation in round 1 jogged a thought for me. And it's that there's sort of multiple audiences for the evaluation that we're doing. One audience is the Department of Labor, where we are required to set up a comparison cohort evaluation that assesses a set of measures that the Department of Labor has established. If you've looked at their annual report template, then you know what it is that the Department of Labor asked for. Then there are a set of evaluation questions and strategies that are very important in the PACE grant, but that are that aren't they're not totally mutually exclusive, but they're not the same either as what the Department of Labor is interested in. And so we have data collection mechanisms and evaluation plans in place that go above and beyond just what the Department of Labor is looking for. And for example, in PACE, the program participants are defined based on the programs of study that they have declared for. There's another significant portion of the grant that focuses on developmental education, which in many cases happens, students are in developmental education way before they declare a program of study. And so we have a separate analysis of developmental education that doesn't even get reported in the annual report template to the Department of Labor.
Thank you, Chris. Another question for Aaron. Have any policies been put in place for your coordinators at each college in collecting and securing Social Security numbers for each of the TAACCCT grant participants?
Well, not that I'm aware of. Oftentimes that's really governed, at least from my perspective, is governed by FERPA to a certain degree. Many of our PACE coordinators have already been trained, have received FERPA training, but also are in positions within their institutions that they're required to handle sensitive student data. And so there are not any that I am currently aware of simply based on the PACE consortium. Now, I'm sure there are several or many institutions that have their own policies and procedures that are outlined specifically per that institution, but there were not any addressed consortium-wide.
Okay. What type of data, Chris, are you asking for specifically that is not covered in the performance reporting and Department of Labor requirements? And I think a related question that came up earlier, what kinds of data are you collecting in the intake form from students?
Yeah. So I should have the annual report up right now. The annual report is built around your program participants relative to members of the comparison cohorts. And the way that we've defined program participants in Arkansas is anybody that is declared for a targeted program of study. So in Arkansas, there are 146 targeted programs of study. And so anyone that's declared is included in the analysis that we report to the Department of Labor. Also, in the PACE grant, there are strategies that focus on improving developmental education completion, which is separate from targeted programs of study. There's also a strategy around assessment score improvement. What they're doing is students come in, they take an assessment score, they test below college level. Students then have an opportunity to study a little bit and then retake the assessment score. And so separate from the Department of Labor reporting, which is really focused on students completing targeted programs of study, there are analyses on developmental education completion, which and we're looking at students that are enrolled in redesigned developmental education classes. Again, it's a separate population from who are reporting as grant participants. And then also the evaluation of the assessment score intervention is looking at anyone that comes in and takes that short assessment score refresher intervention. And so we're looking at the difference in assessment scores from test 1 to test 2. These are all those are examples of evaluation questions that they're interested in Arkansas, and ultimately those are reported to the Department of Labor, but not within the annual reporting template, which focuses only on program participants.
Well, thank you. In regards to the wage and employment information, we know that there's generally a 2-quarter lag in acquiring that data. How do you manage, Chris, in terms of the timing of your analysis with that 6-month delay in getting labor and employment data?
We do analysis using data that's available, and so we don't do any analyses of wage records until the records until it becomes available.
Okay. We have several requests for information, including Chris's email address, and that's going to cost you. Just kidding. But we'll make those available. We can provide that, or Chris, with your permission, we can provide that. Oh, here it is.
Yep.
That contact information is up on the screen. Also, we'll arrange for the participant release form, if that's okay, with Aaron, to be placed in the SharePoint database, and we'll save these questions, those we don't get to, and try to provide other resources up on the website to help answer them. We've got we're about out of our time today. I want to thank everyone for calling in. I especially want to thank Chris Spence and Aaron Devine for providing a wealth of information about both the PACE project and the ins and outs and twists and turns of evaluating it. I want to say a little bit more about our next event in the Learning Activities series for the TAACCCT evaluation and grant program. In 2 weeks, on Tuesday, December 17th, we're going to have a smaller event that's for the evaluators, for the external third-party evaluators, and it's going to be a different format than this webinar. It'll be a virtual roundtable for a group of you, essentially first come, first serve, the first 20 who sign up, to have a discussion over the webinar format of comparison groups, basically to continue the conversation and explore in more detail with each other some of the issues that came up in our comparison group webinar a few weeks ago. We'll be sending out information in the next couple of days with more specifics about how to sign up for that and some of the logistics. Again, if you have questions or are looking for resources, please email tacceval@urban.org. We will be putting the PowerPoint slides up on the SharePoint site, so keep an eye open for that in the next couple of days. And thank you very much for signing in, and we'll talk to you later.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.